Greetings and welcome back to Room 303, and this is the fourth and final lecture of our introduction to Room 303. Just to kind of walk you through again the territory we've covered. In the first lecture we talked about rules and guidelines and logistics, and in the second lecture we talked about that really important master scheduling. In the third lecture we talked about the first of our state standards, reading and annotation work. And now we're going to turn to the second of our state standards, and the focus here will be on writing. Again, I want you to take out blank sheets of paper. I want you to make sure you flow or take notes, so that way you have evidence, documentation that you actually watch these lectures. Again, I give you plus points, and I highly recommend that you do this. Have your parent, a significant other or parent, to sit down and watch this lecture just like the other three. It's so important that we all together are working to understand exactly what it is that we're doing in Room 303. And we can remove a lot of the confusion if all three parties that I talked about in that first lecture, in the learning community, the student, the parent, and then of course the instructor here, Mr. McGee, if we're all working together, we're all on the same playbook page. Does that make sense? So I really do recommend that all four of these lectures are viewed by the significant other parent. Let's talk really quickly, and I want to make a couple of quick observations, and I'll begin, as won't shock you now, a word picture maybe to help you. But think about this for a moment. For those of us that are really, for us, the thing in our neck is not just maybe reading, but it's writing. We'll talk about maybe why that's the case here for just a second. But I'd like to point out that if you are learning connecting new to old in your reading, then when it comes time to write, you actually have something meaningful to say. Think about the connection between reading and writing then for us in 303. Again, we defined academic reading, annotation, as reading with a purpose because we know we're going to have to respond. Well, one of the key ways that we respond to the reading of our texts in 303 is, guess what? Through our writing. But think about this for a word picture, and I've shared this word picture with lots of students, and they go, "Yeah, this is one of those word pictures. It's funny, but it's not." Imagine for a moment if I just looked over at that brick wall, and I decided I wanted to run through it. So I just run as hard as I can. Wham! I hit the wall, down I fall. And all of a sudden I get up, I start screaming at the wall, and I back up even further. And you're watching this, and I back up even further, and I run and I hit it again. Now my nose is broken and bleeding. My arm is all jacked up. And I get up and I just start screaming at this wall. And I back up even further. And you step in and you go, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. Mr. McGee, just want to let you know there's this thing called a door. If getting through the wall into the hall outside is kind of your goal, there's this thing called a door. Watch how it works." And it's funny until it's not, right? For a lot of us, that running into the wall over and over again has been basically the word picture for us in understanding of writing. And I think there's a reason why that's the case, and I want to talk a little bit about that with you. But first, let's just get some logistics out of the way. And I've kind of referenced some of this already, but now I'm going to flesh it out for you. Basically, there's three kinds of writing that we do in 303. The first is the writing that we will do at the beginning of class to focus us. Normally, I'll just call this journal writing, okay? And sometimes it's handed in, but most of the time it's not. And it's just writing to help us get ready for what we will do in that middle third of our class time together. The second kind of writing is the essay writing that will be a part of our reading writing assessment packets. It's almost always an essay, and we'll talk more about that here in a bit. And then the third kind of writing is the MyAccess writing. It doesn't come in a reading writing assessment packet. It's just simply done. We submit it online. It's scored through telemetric scoring. You then will print a certain version of the MyAccess for me, and there's some tutorial information online at LearnStrong to get more information about that. Let's talk through the writing process. And I've put some information on the whiteboard here behind me. There are other videos on LearnStrong if you even need more clarification on this. Let's talk through why it is the case that very often, regularly, students feel like they're running into that wall, like the example that I just gave. Most students approach writing from the wrong perspective. What do I mean by that? I hope, again, you're writing this down. Most students approach their writing from form to content. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, there's different kinds of forms of writing. So, for example, the English teacher says to the student, "Go home and write a story." We'll obviously be doing this in our class. Go home and write a story. So down you go, you sit at the computer screen looks back at you, you look at the computer screen and you say what? I gotta write a story, I gotta write a story, I gotta write a story. I hate it when I have to do this, I can't ever come up with an idea. This is terrible, I hate this kind of thing. You throw out something really silly, or you don't like it or whatever, right? You're looking for an idea that never comes. Or, the instructor says write a poem, same gig. Or write an essay. We'll have to do a lot of those, at least one a week. Gotta write an essay, gotta write an essay. I hate doing this. Professional writers do not write from this perspective. They, in fact, invert the process. And they begin with content, an idea. And then they come back to write all kinds of different types of forms. Stephen King does not sit down to write a novel, for example. Okay? He doesn't? No, not at all. This is not the way professional writers write. Well, what do? They begin searching for an idea that they can then turn into any number of forms of writing. For those of you who are going to say in your goals for writing that one is to overcome this problem of writer's block, we're going to talk a lot about the challenges of pre-writing, coming up with an idea. And the suggestion that we're going to make is rooted in some writing theory that goes way, way back a number of years. A lot of it I have done as well to try and help students know how to write. I began many years ago by researching middle school writers. Go in front of a classroom of students and say today I'm going to have you write. They'd all groan, no. And I'd say, no, it's not for a grade. And they go, okay. And then I had middle schoolers, so I gave them, a favorite animal topic or whatever. But I wasn't interested in what they said. I was interested in how they actually physically wrote. I go back to the back of the room, sit down, just observe. And sure enough, everybody's looking at a blank sheet of paper. You'd start hearing that tapping on the click, 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 pins, click, click. Finally, somebody start writing. Somewhere between the 5th and the 7th line, the pen would stop, the eyes would go up to the top, begin to read, and then all of a sudden, paper gets torn out of a notebook, tear it up, start over again. More of this, click, 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 click. I took a position at an obscure high school in the middle of the Bighorn Mountains called Worland High School. Came into room 303 the very first day. I walked into a bunch of seniors and they said, hi guys, I'm new, Mr. McGee, today we're going to write. Same groan. And I said, no, it's not for a grade, it's just for fun. And then I gave them a senior assignment, the place you would rather be than in room 303 right now and the person you would like to be with. I thought that was a legitimate, topic for seniors. And then I went to the back of the room and just sat down and waited. It took about 10 seconds before I heard that. Click, 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 click. 22 seconds in, I heard that first. Whoa, they do it here too. And as I've told this story, I've told it all over the world, people go, yeah, that's it exactly. And if I'm typing, for example, it's one of those things. Now let me give you a little insight. The human mind is an amazing thing, and you can do a lot of things with the human mind, but there's something that you cannot do. And I can, I always challenge students to play this game with their friends. Bet them money, you'll win every time. Ask them to do this. Say, I'm going to have you start writing. Give them a bogus topic like what you did last night. And I'm going to whisper something in your ear, and I don't want you to stop writing. I want you to keep writing while I whisper in your ear, and then I just want you to do what I'm going to tell you to do. And you can tell them in advance. A lot of people will think they can actually do this. They can't, but watch it. Watch how it works. They start writing what they did last night. When they get to about line 5, whisper in their ear, okay, I want you to keep writing, but I want you to read out loud what you wrote on the first line. I was giving this lecture once, and a freshman actually said, oh, I can do that. That'll be easy. I said, great, I love it. Exhibit A, let's take a look. And sure enough, guess what? As amazing as the human mind is, it cannot do those two things of reading and writing at the same time. Those are mutually exclusive skill sets, cannot be done at the same time. Well, what is it then that we do normally when we write? Well, we start writing, and now we're going to have to talk about what I call the two writers' minds. We start writing, and the first mind is the creator mind. Creating, writing. Somewhere between, we have found the 5th and the 7th line. Out of the shadow steps the second mind. That is to say, the editor's mind, the critic's voice. Sometimes we call these voices instead of minds. For those of you who are fans of that old film Waterboy, when he sees that coach's voice screaming at him, calling him an idiot, that's that voice. And that voice says, do you have any idea how crummy you are at this? No, I'm serious. You're really, really bad at this. If you don't believe me, stop writing and start reading. And sure enough, we go back up to the very beginning and we start reading what we've written, and sure enough, it sounds stupid. We've got mistakes, or we hit the delete key and start all over again. the editor's voice, and we can't get into where this comes from. Maybe some of us lived in homes where the first thing our significant other parents said when they walked in the room was what was wrong with the room and why it was so messy. It's hard to know where it comes from, but we know that it exists, and we know it's a very powerful voice. So we're going to do something in our pre-writing that I call jam writing. Others have called free writing. It's writing that is specifically for only you. Nobody else ever sees it. And there's no rules involved whatsoever other than the simple rules. You have to keep going. Whatever is in the brain, underline the word, goes onto the page. If you don't know what you want to say, then that's what you write. I don't know what I want to write about. I don't know what I want to write about. It reminds us of another word picture back in middle school when the PE teacher maybe said, okay, all of the class, okay, we're all going to run the mile today, ready, go. And everybody gets on and starts running around that track, you know. And halfway around the second lap, you know, something was wrong with your side, and so you decided to slow down. You know, something like wrong, and the instructor screamed, keep going. And of course, you went for a little bit long, and then you're like, dude, I'm going to like fall over and asphyxiate on the middle of this track, and everybody's going to like look over at me, you know, I'm dead, and I'm going to be a bummer, you know, for you. The reality is, you know, you have to stop. So you get ready to stop, and the instructor, keep going. Well, for those of us that never learned how to keep going, the truth of the matter is, of course, there is that wall of pain, and then we talk about that thing called the second wind. Professional runners, of course, know how to hit the wall quickly, get through it, and as long as they have proper nutrition, they can go for a long time, can't they, right? We know writing is very similar. Right at about the 10th minute of writing, the editor's voice becomes really loud and strong. You need to stop and start reading what you have written. It's all dumb. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to challenge you in your jam writing, and this is a lot of writing that you're going to do on your own, okay? But I'm going to challenge you in your jam writing to try and get through that wall of criticism and then just keep writing. The goal for us is to get beyond 10 minutes. Now, there are different ways to prove how hard this is. If you've got a computer that you can turn the monitor off on, go ahead and try and type tonight some piece of writing for 10 minutes without looking at what you've written. If it's not to show anybody, what difference does it make what it looks like? Lots of jam writing works better handwritten, because students just feel comfortable just writing whatever is in their brain. And then we can come back and we can study the ideas that we've generated in our jam writing and turn it into any number of forms. This, by the way, is what we call discovery writing. A great writer once said, I don't write because I know what it is I have to say. I write to discover what it is I must say. That discovery writing will be a part of this work. Let's talk about the writing process, and that's what you want to call it now on your notes. The writing process. When we write, we always have a process in 303. First, there's what we call the writing prompt. Prompt is just another word for the question that you must write on. Usually coming out of the textbook, there will usually be a page associated with it and some guidelines as well that you want to pay attention to. After the writing prompt has been assigned, the next thing that you want to do is some pre-writing. So you want to start thinking a little bit through your jam writing about what it is that you think on the topic. Again, if you've done your reading well, annotative reading, then you have ideas already that you're kind of playing. After the pre-writing, the jam writing, then we make an outline and we begin to do what we call research to prepare to write the actual draft. A lot of times the outline is not required that you hand in to me, okay? It just kind of depends. We then will go through a rough draft process of the essay. The essay always is typed. The early drafts can, of course, be handwritten, but anything that you would show to McGee is always going to be typed, okay? Also, it's always going to be double-spaced so that we can do work in terms of editing and that kind of thing, and always use 10-point and Times font, all right? So that way we can save paper because we're trying to save as much paper as we can. Next, we're going to go through a process of revision and editing. Sometimes that's done actually looking at the screen. Other times you're going to hit the print key and then go through the process of editing. I'm going to always recommend that you never hand anything in to me without having it proofed at least 3 times. At least once by an adult, somebody over the age of 21. Preferably somebody who feels very comfortable finding errors. I remember once a student saying, you know, I hate to give it to my mom because she always finds all these errors. And I'm like, dude, that's the whole point. You want to find the errors in the revision stage. See, the thing is, these two minds are both equally important. The creator's mind is important, but so is the editor's mind. But the editor comes later when we've actually started the process of editing and revisions. And of course, you've all been probably through this process of realizing that you can find somebody else's mistakes so much easier than your own, which is why we want to have other people look at it. Sometimes I will require that you demonstrate that you've actually had other people take a look at your essay. I'm recommending that for those of you who are ABC students, you really want to pay close attention to your editing and your revisions. And for some of you, that will be one of your goals for writing as well. Okay? Finally, you're going to hand in the essay to Mr. McGee. Even the MyAccess you'll hand in, and the way that you will do this then is always through the grade bin. Now understand about MyAccess, you are given a score on MyAccess, but I always reserve the right to change that score depending upon the quality of the work. So Mr. McGee always sees your work through the Omega file and then through the grade bin. Okay? Now let's talk through the next part of our understanding of writing in room 303, and it has to do with this really important term, skeleton guide. And I hope that you're looking at your skeleton guide right now. You've been given a hard copy, and of course you can always find one right there on the Learn Strong page as well. I highly recommend that you take a look at that now as we go through this next part of our process. Okay? When we write, this is important, you want to write this down as you flow this lecture. When we write, you need to understand that we are playing a kind of game where you must show or demonstrate that you understand the rules of the game. This is, again, back to our assessment part and evidence. Okay? So in other words, I give you an assigned topic, a writing prompt. You write on that writing prompt to demonstrate to Mr. McGee, I understand the rules of the game that we are kind of playing together. Okay? Well, what are the rules? All understood through our skeleton guide. All right? Everything in our formal writing is built off of the academic paragraph. You want to write that term down. What do I mean by that? 5 to 7 sentences at least, okay, of sentences that are going to form around a single idea to construct the unit we call the paragraph. Right? I'll know paragraphing because, of course, there's an indentation there, and that's crucial. So as I look down the left-hand side of any essay formula that you're giving to me, I will immediately identify at least 5 of these paragraphs. And this is, of course, what we call the traditional 5-paragraph essay. Right? If you're going to become a really good academic writer, especially at the university level, it's just like in music, right? So you learn music, you got to learn those scales. Na 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 na. Of course, it's difficult, it's painful, it's boring to do these scale work all for over and over. Why do we do that? Because ultimately we're going to move beyond that to some kind of beyond composition, right? That takes those notes and does something with them. In academic writing, the 5-paragraph essay is kind of the scale, the fundamental scale. We've got to learn how to do this when we're in high school, so that as we move on to university, we're obviously going to write essays much longer than 5 paragraphs, even in our junior and our senior year. However, we've got to start, right? We've got to start to learn how to do it. Let's talk really quickly about the understanding of the paragraph as driven by the topic sentence. You're always going to have a single sentence in the essay that will qualify what that, you're always going to have a single essay in the paragraph that will qualify what that paragraph is about. Okay? The topic sentences are, first of all, going to be understood as in the body of the paper. Those 3 paragraphs we'll call the body, they're always going to be the first sentence I'm going to recommend. In the first paragraph, we're going to call that our thesis sentence. That's the topic sentence, and it will not be the first sentence of that paragraph, the first paragraph, but rather the last sentence. And we'll get into this here in a bit to kind of talk about it. All right, let's talk through skeleton guide real quickly. Let's outline as we go. And as we talk a little bit about this, let's talk about the paragraphing that we'll work with. All right? So we're now looking at the very handout that you have in front of you there. The skeleton guide is the outline for the traditional 5-paragraph essay, which fundamentally has 3 parts. We can go through this pretty quickly. Most of this information you should already know. There should be some kind of a beginning or an intro paragraph. This is where your thesis will always be. We'll talk about that in more detail in a bit. You should have a middle part of your essay with 3 body paragraphs at least. These we will call points of validation. Validation just means to prove. POVs, points of validation. And then finally you'll have an end or a conclusion paragraph which is going to do some fundamental things as well. Okay? When you get ready to write a paper, the first thing is always the login information. Again, record keeping is crucial for us. The login information, what is the topic, the page number, the date when the paper is due. Okay? You're always then going to have two titles. This is crucial to understanding skeleton God. Two titles to your essay. The first title is what we always call our creative title, demonstrating some kind of creativity on your part. The second title is more important, and this is the academic title, and it sits right beneath the creative title, and it's in parenthetics. And there's always a certain kind of language that's associated with it, a discussion of, an analysis of, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in the topic, in the academic title, you're always providing what the fundamental thesis of the paper is. Okay? So for example, if I was asking you to discuss whether you agree or disagree with Wordsworth's views in The Rainbow, a text that we worked with in the last lecture, the creative title might be Jump Up, okay? Borrowing off of the idea of My Heart Leaps Up When I Behold the Rainbow in the Sky. But the academic title would be A Critical Analysis of Wordsworth's Understanding of Curiosity and Learning from his poem Rainbow. That is an academic title, okay? What it does is it tells me what your thesis of what this paper is going to be about. All right? We then will have the first paragraph. The first paragraph is our intro paragraph. And the very first sentence is not our thesis. Is not our thesis. The first sentence is what we call our hook line. Okay? Lots of students like to use a quote that they find, something that works to get them into the essay. All right? The next thing is that if you're going to be writing about a text, you've got to provide the title, you've got to provide the author's name. Remember, this is important, write this down. You'll lose points on your essay if you don't do this. Anytime you're showing a text title, just italicize it. And that removes the confusion about whether you should underline it or whether you should put quotation marks around it. Just italicize it, okay? Next, you want to provide some real brief information about the author. Maybe one line, as always, about the author. Okay, dude, you're the one that assigned me the text. Why would I have to tell you about author? Because we're playing a game. Remember? Finally, if you're working with a text title, you want to provide at least a one-line plot summary, right? What the text was about, just real briefly, at level 1 from our reading annotative work, right? Okay. If you are working with any kind of important terms or words, this is crucial, and it's right there on that skeleton guide that you are looking at. If you're working with any kind of terms, for example, let's say that you have to write about irony, you always want to make sure that you define these terms. Okay? Yeah, but doesn't the instructor know what irony means? Remember, we're playing a game. So make sure that you're always providing the definitions of important language that you'll be using in the paper itself. All right? Finally, you got to have a proper, arguable thesis. You'll want to write this down. This is crucial. Okay? And if you're suffering from monkey mind, pause the video for a second, then come back so you can really hear what I'm about to say. This is important. Every academic essay possesses a thesis. That last sentence of the first paragraph or the last sentence of the introductory paragraphs, if you decide to work with more than one paragraph for the introduction. And the thesis always must be arguable. Now, what does that mean? We are never going to simply, quote unquote, tell the story in our essay, plot summary. So, for example, you read The Rainbow and then you just simply summarize it and call that an essay. Way wrong answer. We are always going to be analyzing, critiquing text when we write these papers. So we have language for that we call writing with the A to B paradigm. Now, what does that mean? It means that all thesis writing is relational. We are relating one idea to another idea. Okay? When we write this, for example, on the whiteboard, the easy way to do this is to say that we are always working with A to B, where our A is some reference to a text, right? So, for example, if we're working with Wordsworth's The Rainbow, you could qualify that as rainbow. But then we're going to say something about the rainbow in our essay. For example, if I were to ask you to critique the ending of that poem, right? The ending of that poem would be your B. So a properly stated thesis would be Wordsworth's Rainbow's conclusion has 3 important meanings. Now that's a thesis. Notice, we don't care whether you like the rainbow or not. Okay? We're interested in how the text works. We're critically analyzing, all right? And so as we write that thesis, we have to pay attention to some element of our A, that is to say our text, and some element of our B. What are we going to say about the text? By the way, you can invert those, and for example, the second element of your thesis could be the text. So for example, there are 3 important meanings or messages from the conclusion of Wordsworth's Rainbow. So you can do it either way, just so long as you make sure you've got both there. Why? Because after your introductory paragraph, you've got at least 3 body paragraphs, again what we call POVs, points of validation. Each one of those POVs has a topic sentence that will be the first sentence of that paragraph. And you want to make sure that each one of those topic sentences has some element of your A from your thesis, a mention to rainbow, for example, in our example here. And some element of your B, what is one of the at least meanings or messages from this poem. Okay? In the body paragraphs, we provide validation. That's why we call them points of validation. There's 2 kinds of validation. Internal validation, external validation. I hope you're writing this down. Internal validation, anytime we quote from the assigned text. So for example, if we're quoting from Wordsworth's Rainbow, that's what we call internal validation. Okay? You always will make sure that you're quoting using quotation marks, right? External validation, right, is quoting that comes from research outside of the text, where we do some kind of research in the databases, and then we will do what we call cite, C-I-T-E, that information. We have to provide what we call attribution. We have to tell where that information came from. Okay? Now, as we think a little bit about internal validation and external validation, when we're quoting internally, after the quote, we always want to make sure in parenthetics that we provide at least the line number, if we're talking about a poetic line, something like that, where it came from, show where it came from. And if we're talking about external validation, then we have to provide the MLA style book citation information in the body of the paper. Now, we almost always have internal validation that's required. Sometimes we don't have external validation, and we'll talk more about that in class as we prepare to get ready to do that. Okay? Finally, we have a conclusion paragraph. This paragraph does 3 things. You want to write this down. We're going to restate, summarize primary thesis, restate, summarize primary points of validation, and then we're going to do this thing called extending beyond the thesis. In other words, we're going to try and leave our essay with some power. After that, if we have used external validation, we will have a works cited page that will list, in MLA style book form, the at least 5 pieces of external validation that are required for the essay, if it is required. Following that, we're going to have some PaperRater information. PaperRater is a software that we use, and you'll run your essays through this software, and you'll actually have printed the first and the last page of your PaperRater report. That will be always the last thing that will appear in your essay. As the skeleton guide says, you always want to be considering as well proper editing of your essay. Okay? There is this full grammar lecture on learnstrong.net if you need to watch it, but several things you want to be paying attention to, and they're listed right there on the skeleton guide. So let's take a look at it. You want to pay attention to your potential problems of fragments. Every sentence in formal grammar has to have both subject and predicate. You want to make sure that you've got both. Secondly, you want to check for run-on sentences, right? The stars were shining, the moon was bright. To have that information without any kind of punctuation in between those 2 sentences is what we call a run-on sentence. Of course, if all you have there is a comma, we call that a comma splice. You want to check, obviously, to make sure that you're using commas correctly. Finally, you want to make sure about pronouns and the usage of pronouns. For example, we don't use pronouns in first sentences of essays. And we certainly want to make sure that we are paying attention to issues of agreement. Everyone forgot their homework is, of course, inappropriate because there is a plural pronoun and every one is singular. So we have to make sure that we pay attention to, to agreement issues. Now, I mentioned this issue of PaperRater. It is a software that you will be using. There is a tutorial on LearnStrong that will explain how to use PaperRater. You want to make sure that you always run through the plagiarism information that's on PaperRater as well. Again, printing the first and the last page. Now, if you're looking for a score above 60% on your papers, all right, your plagiarism score has to be above an 80%. Again, just to remind you, if you're caught plagiarizing, that is to say, using information that is not your own but calling it your own, in other words, you do not give proper attribution as to where it came from, copying and pasting from the internet, etc., then you will fail for a writing assessment, and you could fail for both quarter as well as for semester. So it's really important that you not plagiarize. Go to our student handbook to see the full explanation of plagiarism and the rules regarding that. Okay, in regards to now how, finally, I will respond to your essays. At the bottom of your read-write packet, as I've already said to you, you're going to provide some information in regards to the basic rubric information of how I'm going to score. Okay? That will all be listed there. But before I ever do that, there's some work that you have to do in the essay itself. Let's talk through that. Before I ever score your essay, you're going to create some rubric information of your own using red ink. All right? First of all, using red ink, you're going to mark the thesis sentence in the left-hand margin with the actual word thesis to demonstrate that you understand that you have a thesis, which should be the last sentence of the first paragraph. Above that thesis, you're going to identify the A and the B. That's why, again, we double space, so you've got the room to do this. Okay. Above the text and above whatever it is that you're critiquing the text is the B. Okay. The third thing you're going to do is you're going to mark in the, using red ink again, in the left-hand margin you're going to mark capital I, capital V for internal validation every time you quote from some text. In the left-hand margin, IV. In the right-hand margin, you're going to identify every time there's a piece of external validation with the capital E, capital V. All right? And if we're using external validation, you're required to use 5 pieces of external validation, quotes from something other than, again, the assigned text. You're going to put capital E, capital V. You're going to go to the works cited page, and down the left-hand margin, you're going to write with red ink 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right next to those MLA-style book citations. And then in the body of the paper, when citation number 1 was quoted, you're going to have the number right next to the EV. Why do we do this? We want to make sure that if you are putting a piece of external validation on the works cited page, you are quoting in the body of the paper that citation. Now remember, we can cite as external validation both directly, that's quotation marks, or indirectly, that's paraphrasing or summarizing or putting it in our own words. All right? Again, online at LearnStrong, there's all kinds of information to kind of explain this all to you so that you make sure that you have it, that you've understood it. On the cover sheet of your reading writing assessment packet, you're going to have the, underneath the annotations listed, you're going to have the actual word writing assessment. You're going to provide me with the actual page number out of the textbook where the prompt comes from and the actual prompt itself. And then once the essay is finished for you, you are going to copy and paste right there the thesis. You're going to actually have the word thesis, then you're going to actually provide the actual thesis for your essay. And POV 1, 2, and 3 will also be copy and pasted right there on the cover page. The idea is simple. Those 4 sentences should be able to tell anybody who's reading your essay, me or anybody else, what your essay is about by looking at those 4 sentences. All right? Finally, how I score. I have 3 ways that I look at your essays. I can do a level 1, which only looks at fundamental skeleton guide issues. I can do a level 2 read, which looks at your validation, both internal and external, and I pay more critical attention to that. Or I can do a 3rd level of reading, which is going to be more critical and looking at issues like mechanics, usage, grammar, that kind of thing. I will identify on your cover sheet what level I've read your essay at, okay? And that's why you're providing me with that information about reading level for your essay, and then a little line there. At the very beginning of semesters, of course, I spend most of my time at level 1, and as we get into the semester at level 2, and then I usually wait for a while. I mean, what difference does it make if your writing is grammatically perfect if you haven't, for example, written to the assigned prompt and you don't follow skeleton guide? Does that make sense? So my job is not to get you. My job is not to ruin your grade. My job is to help you, are you ready for this? Learn through your writing. Let's finish. And that is the goal. Connecting new to old as you write. Again, if you need help, you've got to ask for help. Allow for Dadless Club after school especially to become a writing center time for you, where you come in and you get your writing improvement work done. Finally, I want to go back to Mikey and his bike. Mikey came back to me after he had fallen off of his bike, and he went inside. He didn't want to do that riding of the bike anymore that day. But he came back a couple of days later, and we tried it again. He learned how to ride a bike like most of you did, by falling over and over again. And yet finally, I can remember the moment when he finally got up and he made it. He rode that bike. Man, what a moment that was to be able to teach him to learn how to do that on his own. The challenge, of course, for you is to keep getting up, keep riding. Make the experience of learning a joyful experience. It's all about your attitude. It's all about being intentional in the early phases with the planning so that you can be more random, more creative, and especially in our writing, right, as we respond to texts. Thank you. Let's have a great semester and a great year.